This podcast is brought to you by the all-new Leupold Mark 4 HD, the first step to long-range dominance.
Hunters, farmers, sporting shooters, it's time to set your sights. It's time to unload on the podcast made for Aussie shooters with Brad.
For a lesser man, this would be a challenge.
Matt.
Quite frankly, I'm going to win this.
And Keith.
I am pretty much the rabbit-proof fence.
It's the NIOA Unloaded Podcast.
Yes, well, welcome, fellas. Welcome to the NIOA Unloaded Podcast. I tell you what, we've got a special treat for you guys here today. And girls, we've got Guy Jackson and Shawn Lawson, PRS shooters, sponsored by Leupold USA. Gentlemen, welcome to the podcast.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks for having us.
Now, listen, you guys have just come off a bit of a weekend shoot. You're up here in Queensland. We thought we'd grab you and say good day.
Yeah, that's it. We've just been to the PRS national match at Jandowie. A good match, first one in Queensland for a little while, so it's awesome to be here.
Mate, and how did you go?
Not too bad. Shawnee went good.
Went all right. Rough day Saturday, good day Sunday, so I managed to snare fourth. And how did you go, Guy?
Yeah, good. Pretty similar day 1 and 2, both pretty good. Ended up in second place. So.
Oh, mate, well, that's not too tardy. Boy,
No.
oh boy.
2 points short of the match win, so super close, but didn't quite get it done, but happy with second.
Good fun, though?
Yeah, awesome match.
Amazing.
Good to be up here in Queensland, away from that cold South Australian weather.
I was going to say, a little bit warmer up here, mate.
Yep, no, it was good.
And listen, of course, joining us here today, we have no Brad, we have no Keith, because they've actually got, I think they've actually got some work on to do today. But we have got from the Armoury, from the Leupold Custom Shop themselves, and of course, a bit of a PRS shooter himself. Would you please welcome Mr. Lachlan Bruce? Yes.
Also from South Australia.
Originally,
Originally from South Australia. Yeah.
Rumour has it he's almost ready to be adopted by Queensland. So
Well, that's the rumour we've heard, but I don't know. He's still on probation. He's
See if we
still
can
on
get the
probation.
passport application.
Yeah.
But he did win the production trophy at the PRS match this weekend, so that might get him some brownie points with the Queensland Fellowship.
We'll see. We'll have to see how we go. No, well done on that, Lockie. That was pretty cool. Hey, listen, how did you guys get into PRS?
So I started, we had a little competition in South Australia, which was called PRC, which was the Precision Rimfire Challenge. And the idea was you took your bunny buster gun, like we've shot today, and it was sort of a mashup of IPSC pistol with a 22 rifle. So I started with that, met a few guys at the club, met Lockie there, and then I sort of moved to our club in South Australia, Precision Rifle SA, and from there got into PRS, meeting these guys, and then trickled into national competition.
Wow. So PRS, for people that don't know, stands for Precision Rifle Series, and it's a whole development. And maybe, Guy, you might want to take us through what it actually entails.
Yeah, for sure. So, I got into PRS pretty similar. I guess always been interested in shooting and rifles and hunting and I guess the pursuit of accuracy. So a friend of mine was into it. I went along, had a look and loved it, got hooked from there. So PRS, I guess for those that don't know, it's long-range precision shooting. But it's not just disciplines like bench rest or F class where you just, at a bench or laying down and just shooting. There's a lot of movement. So I guess it's sort of simulates like real life situations, hunting and stuff like that, where you might be shooting off of a fence post or a tree or the back of a vehicle. So you'll get given a series of targets to engage. You'll get a time limit to engage them. That's typically around the 90 to 120 seconds. Most stages are sort of 8 to 12 rounds. And you've basically got to go through a series of positions and shoot and engage those targets. We shoot steel targets, so there's not a scoring system for where you hit on the target. It's just a hit or a miss. So, 10 shots is a pretty standard stage. And, if you get 8 impacts, your score is 8, regardless of where you hit those targets. So really it's about building positions to get solid, making good wing calls, and, I guess just dialing the right data to get your elevation on target.
And this sport is really starting to take off in Australia. I mean, we know it's very popular in the US, but in Australia, it's really starting to grow, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely. It's I believe it's one of the fastest growing shooting sports in Australia. I guess a lot of the shooting sports, have a little bit of an older demographic, whereas PRS is a lot more younger guys, probably because it's a little bit more exciting and full on and action packed. So yeah, people really get into it, and it's great fun. And I think as the few years with COVID and stuff like that kind of stunted the sport's growth a little bit with ranges being closed. But over the next few years, I think it'll continue to grow and get some more shooters and really probably become one of the most popular shooting sports in Australia.
that's the great thing that we're seeing, because we're seeing a lot of young people, young fellas especially, but also the young ladies are also getting involved. One of the things that I've wanted to know is that you've got two different types. You've got the PRS with rimfire, you've got it with centerfire, and then you've also got another thing called NRL 22. So I think for some people out there, they're hearing all these different things. Can you actually break it down what each one means?
Sure. So I'll talk to the NRL 22 is National Rifle League 22 series. The match for that is actually dictated by NRL. So they give you the course of fire. There is a standard target package. There is a standard set of props. And that is the same course of fire that is shot across the world by every club that competes in it. So you can be shooting the same course of fire as a guy in Spain, a guy in England, a guy in America. So we've started that at our club. I was lucky enough to be able to go to America last year and represent Australia in the NRL competition.
How did you go?
I came 29th, which was equal second international. So I did okay. And yeah, that's a really good entry level, get you into the sport. Same thing, it's binary scoring. You hit it or you miss. And the course of fire is released earlier, so you can practice it. You can get your head around it. It's not as intimidating.
Very accessible.
Very accessible, yeah.
Very accessible, and it's probably, I don't want to say anything that someone takes the wrong way, but it's a bit more basic in terms of very basic props, more targeted at people that, just sort of get into it and have a go. A lot of father sons, father daughters, there's a lot more of a bit of, I guess, a family sort of low-key kind of vibe to it.
Yeah,
obviously once you get to the pointy end, you're traveling to the States for finales, there's people taking it very seriously, but it's a little bit more of anyone can have a go, whereas the PRS is a little bit more precision orientated. It's probably a little bit more challenging courses of fire. Probably people generally using a little bit more high-end gear, that sort of thing.
The course of fire is different as well. So NRL is also designed to be able to be shot on pistol ranges.
Okay.
So your max distance will generally be 100 metres. Whereas with PRS 22, we can shoot out to 300 metres with our 22s.
Gotcha.
Yep. So PRS, the Centerfire, is a bit more, precision orientated. Like I said, higher end gear, probably a little bit more complicated target engagements, that sort of thing. And the PRS 22 is very much a mimic of the Centerfire 22. So that's where the differentiation between the PRS 22 and the NRL 22 is. So.
Yeah, but I guess if you're looking at wanting to start out and maybe to start to get a flavour for PRS, NRL 22 is a good place to start.
I think if you just want to, get into it for a bit of fun, find a hobby, something the family can do together, that sort of thing, I think the NRL 22 is good. If you're someone that wants to get into it as a sport in general and you're potentially looking to transition towards Centerfire, then maybe the PRS 22, because it's a little bit more of a bit more mimicked of that PRS Centerfire. Yeah. So, it depends what you want to do and what you're trying to, get after. But at the end of the day, if someone wants to get into it, you're probably going to be limited by what clubs are near you. So some clubs shoot NRL 22 and some clubs shoot PRS 22. It just depends on the club. So the reality is, whatever your closest club is, whatever they shoot, just go and have a crack, because a lot of people are interested in it. They're curious, but they maybe don't have the confidence to just go and have a go. But just come along to a range, find a club, come along, see what it's about. Everyone's more than willing to help and, lend you their gear and show you what it's all about. So just encourage people to get out there and have a crack.
So Lockie, this is something that you've got into fairly recently. What sort of attracted you to PRS?
Pretty much the same thing as these guys. I shot PRC a lot with Shawn in the early days, and then of course that club at Monado opened up for the larger scale stuff. So we were shooting a lot of matches there, and I'm really competitive and I like a good dynamic environment. So talking, shotgun, for example, PRS is very much the sporting clays of the rifle shooting in a lot of ways. It's very dynamic. You're never quite shooting the same two targets twice. Every time you go to a match, it's quite different, and that really appeals to me. I can't sit and do the same sort of course of fire over and over again. I sort of switch off to it a bit. So something different every time really is what attracts me to it, and the challenge.
That's what I was going to mention before as well, is that, if you're shooting bench rest or F-class, great sports, but you're kind of going and doing the same thing and perfecting that over and over and over again. Whereas the PRS and NRL,
it mixes it up, doesn't it?
You're never going to, every time you go to a match, every stage is unique to that match and that course of fire. Like, it's different every time. So when you go there, you've got no idea exactly what you're going to do. So rather than, I guess, training one specific thing and getting good at one thing, you've got to be able to adapt and overcome. And there's a lot of problem solving, and it's very much a mental game.
Yeah, right.
And the other thing I think is it's not necessarily a gear race. You need good gear, you need capable gear, but you can't buy a win. So, you know, a lot of the sports that purely is just precision and nothing else, you're just at a bench or prone or whatnot. Essentially, you've still got to pick the win to be a good shooter, but there's a lot more element of the best rifle will win. Whereas with PRS, you need a good rifle to win, but the best shooter will generally still, you know,
Make the big difference.
Yeah, that's right. A good shooter with a bad rifle would still beat an average shooter with a good rifle.
Yeah.
So there's a lot more, you know, you're not relying on the gear. You're sort of, it's up to you as the individual to perform.
So do all three of you do both rimfire and centerfire? Okay, cool. All right. Well, look, I think what we need to do is we need to go through and see what each rig everyone's got. So let's start with the rimfire side of things. Guy, from you, just tell us about your rifle and your scope.
Yeah, for sure. So my rimfire setup, currently I've got a Voodoo 360 barreled action. I run that in an Masterpiece Arms Matrix chassis. I have a Trigger Tech trigger. And then on top of that, I run the Leupold Mark 4 optics. So I run the 6-24.
Mark 4 HD, yeah.
Yep, the Mark 4 HD. So yeah, one of the newest scopes from Leupold, which has been a really exciting product to release. We'll talk a bit more about the Mark 5 later, but the Mark 5 is fantastic for a lot of things, but there was a few little things that probably, based on shooter feedback, could have been improved specific for rimfire. And the Mark 4 has absolutely nailed that. So yeah.
Like in things like parallax?
Yeah, correct. So a couple of the things, one thing I really like about the Mark IV, which I know was a change made or a feature added based on feedback, was just the parallax being able to focus at closer ranges. So I believe it's 25 yards, Lockie?
15, I think.
15? Okay, yeah, it's a lot closer. We don't really shoot targets inside around 25, 30. So anyway, it goes down to that. So you can shoot anything from, 15, 20 meters away out to, like Shawn said, your 300 meters plus with your rimfire. The windage, you've, rather than having a capped windage, you've got
a zero lock.
A zero lock, yeah. So that's a really good feature as well. So, and obviously the Mark IV, rimfire is probably a little bit more of an accessible sport from a cost perspective.
Yeah.
So the Mark IV, Leupold has done a really good job at building a really first class optic, but keeping it at a competitive price point. So I think the Mark IV is about as good as it gets.
But I think also that, what needs to be mentioned here as well is also just the ammo cost.
Yeah, 100%.
For 22,
100%.
as opposed to centerfires, also makes it a lot more accessible.
The other big one is your barrel. So you buy, whether you buy a Savage, a Ruger, a Voodoo, like whatever rimfire you're going to buy, and essentially, unless you want to change something, the barrel will last forever.
Yeah.
Whereas with centerfire, you're burning out barrels very quickly. That's something that a lot of people that aren't into, I guess, precision or competition shooting don't realize, is the barrels have a very short lifespan. So if you're shooting a lot of PRS, you can go through several barrels in one season with centerfire, whereas with rimfire, the barrel will last forever, basically. Okay. So that's a huge cost that's not there in rimfire.
What about you, Shawn? What's your setup, mate?
So I've just got a Voodoo V22 with a 90-degree action. That was a barreled action. I run that in a Masterpiece Arms Matrix Pro chassis, Trigger Tech trigger in that. And then, also running the Mark IV on top. Really, really loving the Mark IV. And I'm liking the fact that I can have the same reticle in both my rimfire and my centerfire scopes.
Yep.
So the PR2 reticle, I love the PR2 reticle.
Yeah, and I will talk a little bit more about that later, Lockie, with the custom shop side of things and reticle changes, etc. But what are you running, Lock?
I've got a Bagara in the 22 as well, and a Mark IV HD on top, of course, and the 624 PR2 reticle has to be.
Yeah,
nice.
And the Mark IV runs the exact same glass as the Mark V too. So with a lot of optics, if you step down from, I guess, the premium precision down, to that next tier below, often you're making some sacrifices, but the Mark IV still has that
You're
same
maintaining
glass.
that same edge.
Yep.
Cool. Okay, so what about centerfire? What's the rig for centerfire?
Yep. So trying to keep things obviously as similar as possible. So Masterpiece Arms Matrix Pro chassis. So in terms of how it feels and how I interface with the rifle is the same. I've got an Impact Precision action. Still running the Trigger Tech trigger, and then I've still got a Porter one-piece mount, and then the Leupold Mark 5 HD. So the main difference, is the optic, and that is a 7-35 with the PR2 reticle. Yeah.
So what sort of distances are you shooting out there with the centerfire?
So most of our centerfire matches, we don't really engage too many targets inside around 300. So maybe some 250-ish, but that's only our closest targets. And then the furthest is it depends on the range we're shooting at. So there's no maximum distance, but it's just whatever that range has. So for example, the match we just shot on the weekend, the furthest distance is 565. That's just what the range goes out to. We shot at NIOA in New South Wales a month or two ago. That went out to 1,000 meter berm, but I think the target was at 980. So generally the furthest targets are anywhere from 500 to 1,000 meters.
Yeah, right.
Most of the ranges in Australia, we're shooting around that 500 to 600 meter mark.
Yeah. What about your setup, Shawn?
So very much the same. I've got an impact action in a Masterpiece Arms Matrix Pro chassis. I'm running the Leupold Mark 5, 7 to 35 on top. It's a Hardy barrel. Oh, our barrels are custom barrels because, as Guy said, we go through two or three a year. So
I've actually toured the Hardy workshop.
yeah,
I've seen the factory. It's pretty impressive.
Yeah, I forgot to say I run a Hardy barrel as well and a Masterpiece Arms DN5 muzzle brake.
Yeah, the new DN5 muzzle brakes, we're really enjoying them. So
and mine's in a chambered in a 6 BRA and yours is a 6 dasher.
6 dasher.
Yeah.
Yep.
Lockie.
I had a Bagara Premier Ridgeback, and again, Mark 5 HD, PR2 reticle, but I'm a 5 to 25 at the moment. So a little bit less magnification.
Yeah, okay. And that's what, just you want a better, quicker acquisition or?
For me, I haven't normally been using as much magnification on stages. It's something I'll probably look at doing a bit more. Essentially, PRS, the lower a magnification you're using, the bigger a field of view you've got of the range. So for finding, think of the range if you're looking down at, you've got probably 50 targets out there on a match day. You're only worried about 3 or 4 of them, and you don't want to be shooting the wrong target because obviously you're not going to get any points. So being able to find those targets on a lower magnification is a bit easier. Once you've done a lot of it, like these guys have, for example, and going up a lot higher in magnification can generally work a bit better. And the other thing too, when you are running a bit higher magnification like that, you guys aren't running on 35 power all the time. For example, you probably sit somewhere in 20, 25 at the moment.
20. I'm generally running around that, 18 to 22, around that 20 mark is most common.
Generally 19.
But by running the 7 to 35, you're not as high a percentage of magnification on your particular optic range. So you're generally a bit more comfortable behind the scope. So for me, I'm only really running around 15 to 16 power at the moment. Both scopes could do it quite comfortably, but 525 is just what I've got around at the moment.
Normally, if people ask me, because 5 to 25 or 7 to 35 is often what people are choosing between. They're the most two common in the PRS. I normally say if you shoot between 15 and 20 power, probably run a 5 to 25. If you shoot 20 to 25 power, I'd go the 7 to 35. Okay. A lot of people shoot around that 20 power. So as Lockie said, you're right in that middle where either will be fine.
Yep.
So what about ammunition? Do you guys load your own or do you factory? Take us through that for the Centerfire side of things.
Yep. So 6 dasher, you can't get factory ammo in Australia, plus the sheer volumes of ammunition we go through.
Yep.
So it's hand loading, and then you can really tune that ammo to perform the best that you can. A weekend for us is 3 days. A competition is 3 days. The competition will generally be somewhere from 170 to 190 rounds of competition.
Yeah, right.
Plus practice, train up, sighting on the Friday beforehand as well. So, yeah.
I normally try and take, depending on the match and whether we're driving or flying, I'll normally take somewhere between 230 to 270 rounds to a match. Obviously at home, before you leave for a match, you'll do a little bit of data validation, zero check, a little bit of practice as well. So, generally you're probably going through approximately 300 rounds per competition, plus any practice you're doing between matches. So we go through a lot of rounds. Mine are all hand loads as well. Same thing as Shawn with the dasher.
What sort of projectiles?
At the moment, I'm using Berger 105 hybrids.
Yep.
Shawn uses Berger
109s.
109s. Yeah,
yep.
So a lot of people run Berger hybrids. They're a very consistent bullet. They're known for their accuracy and more importantly, the consistency.
Yep. What about you?
Federal Premium, 130 grain 6.5 Creedmoor. So I'm still running a bit bigger than you guys are, a bit more recoil, which for PRS isn't really an advantage, but it's the rifle I've gotten running with at the moment and quite happy with it. But yeah, the 6, you should probably explain why those 6mm cartridges, particularly in the shorter ones, are becoming popular at the moment.
For sure. So one of the biggest parts of the sport is recoil management and seeing where your shots go. So because you're not just laying down prone, you're often shooting off of one bag, off of a prop or a barricade or a post or something like that. You've really got to manage that recoil to see what's happening downrange. Being able to see is so important. So generally guys are looking for cartridges that are consistent and accurate, but also have low recoil. So the 6mm is sort of the happy point where if you go any smaller, your bullet down range is not giving you a lot of feedback. Whether you hit a target, whether you hit the dirt, whatever happens, you're not getting a lot of feedback down range. If you go bigger than a 6, up to like a 6.5, something like that, you've got a bit more recoil to manage. So depending on the type of match and the range you're at, that 6 mil just seems to be the sweet spot. And generally the smaller 6s, like a 6BR, 6BRA, 6-Dasher, 6GT, that seems to be the compromise between recoil management, but still getting some feedback downrange. Obviously, you're not hunting, so you don't need energy on target. You just need to be able to hit it and see what happens.
Yep. So
I think a bit of a myth that should be dispelled, for example, is the fact that the 6BRA doesn't have, less drop or more wind hold. We're running basically the same ballistic coefficient at the same speed, and our data is almost identical the whole way out at NIOA to 980. I think we had the same hold.
Yeah, that's
so
right.
Between the two projectiles, but the only difference is I've just got more recoil.
Yeah,
And
exactly.
that was
So,
pretty much
your
it.
advantage is if you're shooting a big plate at a big distance and you hit it, you may get a little bit more feedback from that plate. It might rock if you hit an edge, but you've got a lot more recoil, so it's harder to see what's going on.
And I guess that's something too that's interesting because, you talk about, Lockie, your side of things, you've got a factory load.
Yep.
Where these guys are hand loading, a lot of time, preparation, that sort of thing. But the factory loads are getting pretty good.
I do a lot of reloading as well, so it should be said I use lap projectiles in a 136 grain, and I can achieve pretty much the same accuracy out of a hand load than I can in that Federal Premium 130. It's very good ammunition. So
watching how that thing shot on the weekend was pretty impressive. You hit some little targets.
for a factory gun, factory ammo, it was going very, very well.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I
That's
guess, sorry.
Probably one thing we didn't touch on before, we were talking about rimfire versus centerfire and the cost. You touched on the time for reloading. That's another thing as well is, you can't buy time. So with rimfire, you can just grab a brick of ammo out the cupboard and off you go. Whereas centerfire, if you're loading your own ammo, is a lot of time.
But I guess that's
grass.
what plays a lot into the actual sport and the fun of it. People love to reload. I know people that, they just love it. It's just a escape. They can get in, they can do their reloads. They've tweaked it all to how they want their, to shoot. And people really enjoy it. For some people, they just want to get out there and shoot. There's the factory loads ready to go as well.
Yes.
But one thing I am very interested in is you guys have been doing this for a fair while now. The sport is evolving, but as that sport's evolving, how does your training evolve?
Yeah, for sure. So I think we were talking about, we had a 3 or 4 hour drive in the car on the way back from the match, which got pretty in depth about how do we improve? How do we get better? How do we train? It's like you said, constantly evolving. I think the guys that are doing well now are doing targeted training. So rather than just going out and practicing or just shooting, they're finding flaws in their game or areas of weakness and then specifically training to target that. So whether it be, you might be, as I mentioned, you've got a time limit for a stage. So let's say there's someone that's hitting a lot of targets that they're shooting at, but they're running out of time and they're losing points. They might be struggling with target acquisition. So, if they're taking a long time to find the targets and running out of time, so they might want to train target acquisition. So they might build their position and aim their rifle and then get a sight picture and, try and just repeat that drill basically. So they're not even shooting. They're just gun down, look through it and just training that drill that into them to get to the point where when they put their rifle down and look through it, they're aiming at the target rather than trying to find it. Or it might be reading the plates. It might be a case of you shoot a big plate, you hit it, but you don't know where you hit it. So then when you move to the smaller plate, you miss. So wherever that area is that you are, I guess, dropping the ball or losing some points, I think guys are starting to identify what their weaknesses are and specifically work on those. Versus if you go back a few years ago, I think people were probably just shooting and just practicing, just going out and just going through the motions.
But I guess it's that it's that whole adage. It's the small things that end up making the big difference at the end, isn't it?
That's right. And it's incredible. You start the sport and you shoot your first match and you go, oh boy, I need to work on everything. And then you'll grow and you'll grow and you'll grow. And, you'll get to that 90% mark reasonably quickly and reasonably easily. But it's those last 10 or, 1% gains that you need to really fight for just to try and get those.
It's a very humbling sport for beginners. It looks easy to an extent. People often come in with a bit of an expectation that they know how to do this. But once you're put out of your comfort zone, you're on the clock, you're under time pressure. We generally say if someone can achieve a 50% score in their first match, they've done exceptionally well.
Yeah, right.
So it's one of those things that, training, as Shawn said at the start, there's a lot of areas to improve. So just by doing it and getting match experience and practicing, you can probably get a lot better. Once you get to a pretty high level, you've got to work really hard to make those 1%ers. It's kind of like making horsepower in a car. You get a stock car, you can do a few little mods and you make heaps more power. But, you look at a top-end drag car, the amount of work they put in to try and save 1/10 of a second, it's a lot to get not much of a return.
Well, if we take the weekend, for example, you missed out on the win by 2 points. And how many rounds do we have over the weekend on comp?
168 rounds.
Yep. So,
wow.
And
so
what was your end score in the end?
My score was 130 points. So I got 130 out of 168 points for the weekend. So I haven't calculated that as a percentage, but the winner got 132. So one thing that just pops to my head straight away was just a gear choice. There was a stage where the bipod that I chose for a stage is one that I have to press 2 little buttons and flick up the legs. So you had to shoot with your bipod, then you move to a bag. So you had to fold the bipod up and then move back to your bipod and fold it down. On that stage, it was 12 rounds. I timed out and only got 10 shots off. After the stage, I realized I should have used my other bipod, which just flicks down on a spring. So
Harris bipod. Yeah.
Harris bipod, yeah. So I only needed probably 4 or 5 more seconds to get those 2 shots off. And simply by choosing the wrong bipod for that stage, there was nothing wrong with using it, but it was just a little slower. That potentially cost me 2 points. There's a match.
But isn't that incredible? Because, you look at all those different things, everything from the gear that you're using, the ammunition that you're using, how quickly you get off the mark when the buzzer goes off to start, how quickly you can acquire a target, whether your bipod's the right bipod or not.
Use the right bag, use the right positions in the right order.
But even by the afternoon or, you're starting to get tired and, and all that sort of stuff. So all of that is playing into those tiny little 1% to get that score throughout. So it's really almost like an endurance race.
Yeah.
To an extent, yeah, it is. It's very much, it's very mentally taxing. I remember a mate and I'd laugh about it. We shot our first national 2-day match. And the next day, you're just walking around the house like a zombie. You're trying to microwave food, but you put it in the fridge, and your wallet's in the freezer, and you're literally just mentally fried because it's 2 days of just nonstop focus.
I don't know if that's just that or it's just us being blokes.
Yeah, probably. Probably.
But I mean, that was one thing I was going to ask. What kind of mental preparation does go into something like this?
So obviously, there's a lot of prep at home in terms of gear and rifle and stuff like that. But I guess mentally, I think it's being as organized as you can with your ammo, your gear, all that sort of stuff is then less to worry about, less rushing last minute, leaves mental capacity free for just focusing on what you're doing. But I guess mentally when we get to the range, people are checking the zero on their rifle, they're checking their data at distance, they're getting familiar with the props. There's probably not a huge amount on the Friday in terms of the mental side of it. That probably more comes into play during the match in terms of, just managing your decision making and your problem solving and even mindset can be a lot. You'll see someone that'll drop a few points on a stage, they get frustrated, they drop their head, and then that carries into the next stage.
Yep.
Where it is
so
very...
how do you refocus that? How do you, like you guys, so you get through, so let's say, for example, this weekend that's gone past, you're just a couple of points down, you got the bipod issue. How do you refocus? You go, I got to get this together. I got to pull it together for this.
I think it's just a case of experience in the sport. I was going to run into a situation from Shawn, but it's just experience in the sport, knowing that nobody shoots a perfect match. Everyone drops a few points. So if you drop a couple of points, if you let that get to you and flow into the next stage, you're just going to get further and further behind. But if you can just forget about that and move on and just keep focused, that someone else is going to drop a few points somewhere else, and you just got to keep your head in the game. Shawn had a rough stage on the second one.
Yeah, it depends how you manage it. We shot 8 stages on Saturday. Stage 1, really, really good. Had a great stage. Stage 2, absolutely binned it. Horrible. So I have struggled with that in the past. I'd have a bad stage and I would carry that on for 2 or 3 stages afterwards. So now I've sort of got myself in the mental process where each stage is its own little match. So you shoot that stage, you're going out the back, you reload your ammo, fill up your magazines, bang, that one's finished, move on to the next one, start again. Do your prep for the next stage and just leave it behind you because, as soon as you're thinking about that.
You can't let it get in your head.
No, absolutely. And, it's a long race. It's a long race. So, and everyone's going to have one stage where it doesn't go well or 2 stages where it doesn't go well. So, I was sitting in 7th overnight and just Sunday managed to keep my head in the game and claw my way up to 4th. So
the other thing is it's actually rare not rare, but it's often people will have a good day and a bad day. So some people will have good day Saturday and lose a few more points on Sunday. Some people will do the opposite. So it's unusual or uncommon for someone to put 2 really good days together. So even if you finish Saturday and you haven't had the best day, you might not be able to go from 10th to 1st, but, if you're in, like Shawn said, 7th overnight, you might be able to claw your way back to a podium or something like that. Or if you're in 22nd, you might be able to get to a top 10. So it really is we always say it's very much a mental game. Obviously, there's the physical side of it as well, but it is very much a mental game.
Yeah, so take us through, there's obviously a lot of newcomers coming to PRS. It's evolving. It's certainly growing as a sport. What's your advice to newcomers coming in? And let's talk, either rimfire and centerfire.
Yep. So come and shoot a match. There's now clubs in every state, I believe, multiple clubs in most states. Just go and shoot a match. Don't worry about having all the gear. Don't worry about buying everything. Don't worry about that. Just, if you're at a match and I'm there, come and tell me I'll give you what you want.
Yeah.
Anything I've got is yours to use. And the whole sport is like that. Everyone wants to help everyone else. And the best way to learn what you don't know, you don't know what you don't know. So go and shoot a match.
Yep.
And then you'll see where you need to go.
I've had friends sort of try and, get good before doing it, if that makes sense. They're sort of
what is it? You think there's a stigma that people don't want to look like a goose out there?
Maybe.
Sort of,
Yeah, maybe. Or they want to get good and come and do well on their first match. So they get a bit of gear, they're doing a bit of practice, they're watching some, videos on YouTube, podcasts, that sort of thing. You go over, have a few shots with your mates, and they're getting to a point where they're half reasonable at it, but they're still sort of tentative to go and shoot that match. And they sort of want to I guess people want to feel like they're prepared and good enough. We were talking about it in the car last night, and I said, often what stops people being ready for a match is that they haven't shot a match. So you just got to go and do it. And then you're going to learn really quick. It's the fastest way to learn. You're going to learn really quickly what's required, where you need to improve, what you need to work on. There's just no way to know that without doing it. Match experience is huge.
I think it's that kind of old adage that, you got to be the fool before you be the master.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that's not just in PRS, that's in life.
Yeah.
That's just in anything. So, that's really interesting. Lockie, have you found newcomers really excited, love the sport?
Yeah, generally there's a lot of enthusiasm for people getting into it. And that first match is really that crunch one. But every single person that comes out of it, even if they've got what they must feel like is the worst score, we've all had that in our first match, you're so excited to develop that and get better at it quite quickly. Like it's motivating, even if you get what feels like the worst result at the time. You're like, oh, I can do this. Like
I don't know what it is about it, but it's very addictive in terms of like what you said. It's not a sport where people come along, have their first crack at it, get quite a poor result and go, oh, it's not for me, or I'm not good enough, or, whatever. They're generally like hungry, keen, go away, work on things, improve it. So that's good to see new shooters being so excited.
And I think one really exciting aspect of PRS is the variability of the day, of what's going on. As you say, you're not just behind one thing, shooting one particular target all day, every day. They mix it up. But I guess one of the questions I'd have to ask you, has there been a time in competition where because of this variability, you guys have had to actually adapt very quickly?
Oh, yeah. There's a lot of adapting. Whether it be changing in weather or weather conditions is probably the biggest one. Okay. So whether it be winds that are, just really strong or switching directions, whether it be rain, fog, mirage, there's so many elements that you've got to adapt and overcome. Is very much a problem-solving sport of basically, essentially the stage is, here's the problem in terms of this is what you got to go and do, and you've got to solve the best way to shoot that to get the highest score. But, we had a stage on the weekend that there was some big targets and some small targets, and there was 2 positions you could choose from. You could choose from an elevated standing position or a prone position. So sometimes people would probably use the prone position first and shoot the big targets to really narrow down your wind call. Then they'd move to the standing position and use that wind call to hit the small targets. Some people would go on the positional standing first and shoot the big targets because it's essentially a bigger target from a less stable position, and then save the prone for last because it's more stable to shoot the small targets. So it's a bit of an each way bet. On the weekend, because we had a fair bit of mirage, which makes it really hard to see the target and can cause you to miss, the people that went prone first did quite well.
Okay.
Because that mirage is, I guess, amplified if you go low. So going down prone first, they had a lot of mirage to deal with, but they're shooting at a bigger target, which makes it easier to hit.
Yep.
You then come up to the standing position, so you're up out of that mirage and you can hit the small targets. Whereas the people that chose to go positional first and then prone, they really struggled on those tiny targets because of that mirage. So that's an example of where if there was no mirage, you would definitely shoot it standing first and then prone, probably.
So to explain what the mirage is doing, effectively it's that heat coming off the ground actually shifts the angle of your image. So the target is actually appearing in your scope slightly higher, I think we worked out.
It can depend on the mirage as to what it does. And that's the mystery of it, is sometimes it'll cause people to miss high and sometimes low.
Yeah.
So in our case on the weekend, it was high. So to give you an idea how small the targets is, that light transfer that's coming through that heat is literally enough of a change that we're aiming at what we think's the target, but it's not the target that we're hitting, if that makes sense. It's enough to miss.
Yeah, that's right.
We had to change our elevation holds to make sure we're actually lining up where the target actually is.
And it's also removing the clarity too. So instead of a nice, clear, crisp image, you've got that heat haze effect. It's very hard to see. So it's hard to identify exactly where the target is. When you do hit or miss, it's harder to identify where you miss. So the mirage would be an example of a challenge that, is going to change some of the ways that you shoot a stage and make your decisions.
Yeah. So Shawn, it seems actually every single stage you have to adapt.
You do, absolutely.
Shot to shot.
Yeah, and the beauty of it as well is every single match is different to every other match. We've got 9 matches for a year, 9 different match directors. They all ride a different style. So you don't know what you're going to get.
Sometimes you're going to have, a really simple stage on paper that's made difficult by the conditions. Sometimes the conditions will be perfect, but you've got a really challenging course of fire, or the targets might be nice and easy to hit because they're big, but the props aren't super stable and you've got a bit of wobble, or, there's just, people that adapt well, do well. People that struggle with new challenges and they're sort of always behind the 8 ball, take a bit longer to pick it up. So in PRS, match experience is huge, because every time you encounter a new problem at a match and you sort of overcome that and learn a new skill, you're more prepped for the next match. So, yeah.
Well, speaking of adaptability, we decided to get you two guys down in the range. We've done this several times. We've done this with Toby Price and Mark Donaldson and a few other people. So we thought we'd get the 2020 Springfield Rimfire 22 and 50 meters. You've got 1 minute to shoot 10 rounds, and we're going to score it on the size of the group. So we're going to cut down to the range now and see how the boys did. Well, here we are. We've got Shawn Lawson first up for the 60-second challenge. There's the clock. You start the time. Time starts now.
Oh, yeah, there we go. Now it's in. Oh, wow.
Done.
Well done, mate.
Well done.
Oh,
How do you feel you went?
not well. I can see how I went.
Rightio, so Guy, you've got to hit the start button and
Yep.
then you are underway. Begin. Done. Oh, he's absolutely smashed it.
Good pace.
Mate, what do you reckon here, Keith? We got Shawn at the top here.
Yeah, I reckon Shawn's got
And we got Guy down here, but there's this one here though. Like
I reckon my overall group size is bigger, but my ES is bigger, but my SD is better.
That was good fun.
No, it is good fun, isn't it? Well, here we are back from the range, boys, and I have the scores. Keith Grundy, our armory manager, he has got the micrometer out. He's done the measurements, and the winner on 68.5 millimeters is Shawn. Congratulations.
Well done, Shawn.
There we go. Now listen, actually, look, Guy, you weren't too far off, mate. 69.5.
1 mil.
All right, now listen, I got to say too from the start, you got to remember these guys aren't using their own rigs here. This is just a stock standard out of the box. We've whacked what scope we got on there, mate?
VX Freedom, little 3 to 9.
Little 3 to 9 Leupold VX Freedom, and we just let them go. We throw them in. We don't even give them a practice, and away they go. So I can tell you right now, guys, not too bad. I think we've still got Toby Price at the top. Yes, we do. And but I tell you what, boys, that's not too bad for being thrown into a range. Did you have fun?
Yeah,
it was good. Really good fun.
Yeah, no, it's always good fun just to get you guys in the range because what I like about having just a stock standard stuff is it's a nice leveler. It just levels the competition a little bit. So excellent. But listen, while we're still here, let's talk Leupold. Now, you guys are actually sponsored by Leupold, sponsored in the States. I think we deal with Nick. I can never pronounce his last name.
We were relying on you to help us with that.
I think you've got to either buy a vowel or something like that. It's difficult. But Nick's a great guy. Tell us a little bit how you managed to get the sponsorship.
Well, it probably come about through Masterpiece Arms. So the chassis company that we deal with. So we both shoot for Masterpiece Arms. I believe Masterpiece Arms may have mentioned our names to Leupold.
Yep.
And yeah, Leupold sort of, I guess, found out about us and decided to put a bit of an Australian team together.
Yeah.
So Shawn and I have been lucky enough to be supported by Leupold, which is a really good family to be involved in. We've developed some good friendships with a lot of the guys internationally and in America on the team, which has been awesome. I'm lucky enough to represent a few companies, and Leupold is definitely one of my favourites.
I think one of the great things, and with NIOA representing Leupold here in Australia, it's a good product. You know what I mean? Like it's one of those things to be sponsored by a particular product, but when the product is actually great, it makes a heck of a difference. So I wonder if you guys could actually talk a little bit, and we'll get over to Lockie in the the custom shop side of things. But let's talk first of all, Mark IV HD. That's been a relatively new release this year. We saw that at SHOT Show when they're looking at doing the release. And I believe we've only just started to get them in. But you guys have actually had these out at the range and getting people and letting them see it at the moment, haven't you?
Yeah, we have. Yep, we've been lucky enough to run the Mark IVs for a little while on our rimfires. And, from, I guess, my experience with it, I think it's a fantastic product, especially value for money. And the few other guys that have had a look through it and use it have also been impressed as well. So I think over the coming months, as that product sort of, stock becomes more readily available and we start seeing quantities arrive, I think it'll be a very popular rimfire scope.
So, Shawn, I was going to say, as a rimfire scope, tell us a little bit about the adjustability.
Yeah, so that ability to bring the parallax down, to those shorter ranges for rimfire is amazing. It's perfect. The magnification ranges really suit rimfire stuff, and you're still getting that HD glass. The image quality you're getting is amazing. Good turrets, both of your
Zero lock,
Zero lock turrets. It just ticks all the boxes for a rimfire scope at a price that it's better than it should be. Really,
and
it's amazing.
Yeah,
I think one thing that's a lot of times if you get a cheaper price point product, you're making sacrifices in the build quality or the features. Whereas with Leupold, because they make all of their own scopes in-house in America, they've got the capability to, I guess, to make things more efficient from a design and manufacture perspective. So Leupold's aim with that scope was not to make a cheaper scope that is of lower quality. It was to find ways to build a good scope, but with less manufacturing expenses.
Yeah, just to bring that price point down.
Yes.
But I think you'll find, again, especially if you're looking at wanting to get into PRS rimfire, that Mark IV, Leupold Mark IV HD is a fantastic scope to start out with.
Yeah, and I should clarify.
And don't get me wrong, it's also an amazing centerfire scope as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's absolutely nothing wrong with putting it on a centerfire. We don't run them on our centerfires, but yeah, if you're wanting to get into centerfire, there's absolutely nothing wrong with running that on your centerfire, and value for money, it's pretty hard to beat.
But I guess, Lockie, where that Mark IV comes in is with that parallax adjustment at shorter distances.
Yeah, spot on. It gives you a bit more flexibility in that parallax range in particular, so you're not making any compromises there. So I've shot a Mark V HD for a few years now, obviously, and for rimfire as well. I know you guys have used them as well, and you can get away with shooting, out a parallax window, let's say in a Mark V, but in Mark IV, you have absolutely no problem at all doing it. So
we keep referring to it as a rimfire scope because it's so good as a rimfire scope and has some features that suit it, but we don't want to be saying that it's not suitable.
It's definitely not locked into a rimfire scope.
But I think that's where you find that it will possibly trend. The other thing too that I'm pretty sure it has available on it is the CDS dial.
Coming. We haven't got it just yet, but I'd
Coming
say in
soon?
the next few months, we'll certainly be able to be producing dials for them. So pretty much anything in the Leupold lineup that has an external adjustment, we can produce a CDS dial for. The Mark IV HD, we're just waiting on some fresh parts to come across because obviously it's a very new scope. The scopes themselves aren't widely distributed yet. They're on the way, but once they land, we'll be making dials.
Yeah, and I think that'll change the game a little bit as well. Because if we start talking Mark V HD now, this is Leupold's, I guess, flagship scope. You want to take us through some of the features, Lockie?
So the Mark V HD is the pinnacle scope for Leupold. So in terms of quality components, it's using the same kind of grade as your Mark IV HD. So that's the key thing we're saying with you not stepping down in that quality to do it. But the Mark V HD has a fraction more elevation travel capability to it. It's probably the best way to put it. The parallax in particular is very forgiving. So when you're producing an optic, there can be some compromises you might have to do. So for example, a Mark IV HD, to come back that closer on parallax, it's a bit like an EFR scope. You do have to change the amount of parallax you're dialing in an individual amount. So the Mark V HD for Centerfire, for example, I know you guys probably had it on the weekend, finding parallax between say 200 and 600 meters like we were on the weekend, you're making very small changes. You've got a very spot on for most stages. I wasn't moving
touch mine either.
You see a lot of people, they'll be changing their parallax for every stage, but that's one thing I found when I shifted to the Mark V was that I could have targets quite a distance apart, but still be, the one parallax setting and not giving anything up.
So that's one small thing that the Mark V HD does in particular that's really, really good. And it's not immediate when you start using it, but once you've used it for a while, it's really hard to go back to something else.
Yep.
Outside of that, you have got a slight bigger tube and things like that. You've got a bigger magnification range as well. But
5
for the
times rather than 4 times.
Spot on. So, 6 to 24 versus 5 to 25, for example. It's small differences, but it's a bit like when you go to, let's say, a supercar company like Ferrari or McLaren. They build supercars that are, call it mid-budget, shall we say, and they have that top of the line, no bars held model where every single design feature is that bit better prepped, a bit better done here, a bit more detail here that just brings it to that top spec, flagship model.
I think you could probably say if you're looking for, the best scope that Leupold has to offer for PRS, you're going to go with the Mark V.
Yeah, right.
If you want exceptional value for money at a more affordable price range without a lot of sacrifices and compromises, the Mark IV HD is the way to go.
And of course, you can get the CDS dial for Mark V.
Absolutely, they're available now.
So that's just something I want to know, Shawn, in terms of the rules and stuff. So if I'm out shooting PRS and this stage, I've got one target at 200 meters and the next target's at 400 meters. Obviously, if I've got a CDS dial, that's great. I can just turn from 2 to 4 and I can be spot on. What about someone that's got another scope and they've got to use holdovers and things like that? Is that just part of the game?
Part of the game can be holdovers. We do that, and that's why the PR2 reticle is so good to us. I don't personally use a CDS dial. Leupold offers a competition dial, which I use exclusively, and I love it. It allows me to do exactly what I want to do. We get all our environmental data out of a Kestrel, and environmentals can change things by 1/10, 2/10. So having the ability and the graduations on the dial with the competition dial just allows me to put it exactly where I want it to go.
A bit like we said with mirage and wind, for example. If you've got wind coming at you or behind you, that's going to change your elevation for the tiny targets that we're talking about. One thing we produce or are going to start producing soon or have available is I run what I'm calling the hybrid speed dial. So I've got basically the same competition dial you've got on my first Revolution, which covers out to around 1,000 meters. And then on my second revolution, just above it, I've got the distance markers of every single distance inside of there. So for me, I find that a really good reference because it's easy to get flustered on a stage. And, you don't want to dial, say, a mil out or a mil wrong somewhere.
Why are you looking at me?
I don't know. It could be something that may have happened in real life. Whereas for me, if I'm talking a 450 meter target, a 200 meter target, I've got that reference straight above. So I can do a bit of both. Or let's say I've had a really flustering moment and for some reason I haven't got my data written out before a stage. I can jump up there and I've got that reference on the target. So I'm going to be pretty close from the get-go. But as far as hunting goes, that's where that CDS style really excels. I know you guys like them for that.
CDS is really, really a good option for hunting because with hunting, really that CDS style giving you a guide of your distance. Let's say if you are to quickly range whatever you're hunting, okay, that's 370 meters.
Yep.
You can quickly get to that on your dial and it's sort of close enough to get the job done because generally, whether you're hunting a deer or pig or whatnot, the area that you're aiming for is big enough that if you're a little high or low, you just need to be pretty close kind of thing. Whereas with the precision of the targets that we're shooting, we might be shooting, we had this weekend a 75 millimeter target, so less than 3 inches at 535 meters, which we're shooting off of one bag on a post.
Yeah.
So for us, if we have a CDS dial which has that distance on it, it's not a fixed number because depending on the humidity, the temperature, the wind direction, the mirage, we're making 1.1 or 0.2 mil adjustments. It's not a fixed thing. So we go to a different match. It's not going to be the exact number.
Yeah.
It's constantly changing. So we have to allow for those things, spin drift, wind, crosswind jump, all of those things. So I think the CDS style is perfect where you need to be a rough guide, get pretty close.
Yep.
Whereas for what we do, we need something that is a little bit more flexible.
The key thing is speed too. For PRS, our targets aren't running away. We've got 5-10 minutes to prep for every stage. So we'll get a stage brief of going, okay, these are your positions, these are your targets, this is your sequence. And then we'll come back from there. We'll look through the binoculars, find all our targets, know where we're at. You've got a really good process for writing dope cards, for example, data on previous engagement, just to clarify that acronym.
Takes a little bit of time to set up.
Yep.
Which you need that little bit of time to set it up. But once it's set up, it's good to go.
Yeah, so you've got all that data on a card that comes with you to the stage. So, okay, this is what I need to dial for here. This is that sequence. So we're spending 5-10 minutes prepping for those shots and getting that perfect data solution for that moment in time. If you're hunting and tried to do exactly the same process we're just doing, that animal's gone.
Yeah. It needs to be, pig, rangefinder, 265,
dial.
Bang, bang. Whereas, we're prepping and being more precise.
And I think that's something too that's pretty exciting. I actually like, I've seen, if you've got a setup for the weekend, you've got a little booklet. It tells you what the stages are. It's got the stand. It tells you a little bit about each thing that you're doing. You really get that time to get that sort of preparation and make that happen. And it's also, I don't know, a little bit of a teaser to actually how exciting that weekend's going to be.
100%. Everyone's different. As we said, it's a lot of mental game. It's your mindset. So some people will get the matchbook on the Friday after practice session's finished. And then on Friday night, they get home and they're studying that like homework. They're reading that back to front, front to back, putting their dope in, writing things down, taking notes. Other people leave that book closed. And when they get to their first stage on Saturday, one stage at a time, they listen to the brief, they read it, they shoot it, they move on to the next one. And there's obviously a lot of people that do something in between. So it depends on your personal game plan and strategy.
Yeah, I think one thing too, I just wanted to mention back with the Leupold scopes, we've talked Mark 4 HD, we've talked Mark 5 HD. The best thing I actually think, and I know this from here working at NIOA, the best thing I believe about the Leupold scope, quite simply, is just the warranty.
Yeah, 100%. As far as I'm aware, Leupold is the only scope brand or manufacturer that allows that support in Australia in terms of you've got scope technicians here. So if you ever have a problem, whether it be a warranty or, as a lot of warranties, potentially a user error, whatever your problem is, you've got scope technicians here that can literally rebuild that thing front to back. They can build it from scratch, from parts. They've got all the equipment to test it. It's all done in-house. You're not putting it in a box and shipping it overseas and waiting 3 or 4 months.
Well, I was going to say, wait months, to get your scope back.
Yeah, that's right. So you've got the ability for, if it was had to happen, a repair or a warranty, it's in-house in Australia, all the capabilities. They can do everything to the same specs as Leupold in the manufacturing facility.
Yep.
but obviously then there's the options for customization. So you've got the customization shop to,
Correct.
you know, if you want to Cerakote it a different color, if you want to change your reticle,
Change your reticles, yeah.
if you want to have your laser engraved, you know, CDS dials,
Turrets, whatever you want to
whatever
do.
you want to do, you've got that full capability in Australia. Whereas,
Parallax adjustment.
yep, that's right.
Yeah, I mean, just the ability to literally pick up the phone and ring the guy that is going to be doing the work. I mean,
Yeah.
it just,
We know these scopes
what's
inside
that
out.
worth?
Any question? Shoot.
you know, the guy at the gun shop's doing a really good job of selling you a Leupold, but he might also push something else. Whereas this guy knows Leupold. That's what he does.
That's what we do.
Um,
yeah.
It's quite amazing, you know, just traveling to matches, even with, obviously we're
Yeah.
lucky that we're personal friends with Lockie, but just hearing in depth, you know, his knowledge and passion for the product. I've personally had 3 or 4 friends recently that, you know, they've had a Mark 5, you know, they've decided they want a different reticle, whatnot. So if you do that, you know, with another brand of scope, you decide you want a different reticle, generally you're going to have to sell that scope and buy another one. But they've sent it straight up to Lockie. You know, Lockie and the crew up here, change out a reticle, check over everything while it's here. You know,
Service it.
it's- Yeah,
Yep.
service
Yeah,
it 100%. You're good to go. So I just think that's really hard to go past, having that support in Australia, which is probably something that a lot of people don't know is actually here and available, and probably assume it maybe is for other brands. But
Yeah, I mean, that's one thing that, you know, we've also been promoting that, you know, the Leupold Custom Shop here in Australia, it's the only one in the Southern Hemisphere.
Yep.
I believe there's one in Canada as well. But we sent our guys over purely for the idea of being able to service here in Australia. We're a long way away. We're on an island a long way away. And, you know, you look at your European scopes and, you know, even other US scopes and, you know, it's months. You know, if something goes wrong, it's gone, you know, and it takes a long time. And if you've got a shoot coming up, you know, you want to be able to get it back. You want to get back in a reasonable time. And what's our sort of turnaround time, Loggy?
Depending on the scope, if we're talking Mark 5, a bit longer to work on, they're generally around a week.
Yep.
Normal scopes generally around 2-3 days.
Yep.
It does depend on workload sometimes. If we've got a lot of stuff happening at once, obviously a scope's a complicated piece of equipment. We are not going to rush your scope, and we do have to put it through all Leupold's testing afterwards. And that whole process does take 48 hours at a minimum, realistically.
And of course, let's not forget Leupold's lifetime
Spot
warranty.
on. Yep.
You know, so if anything, anytime goes wrong with that scope, we will either repair it or replace it for the lifetime of that scope, and that could be for several generations.
the very first scope that I ever purchased was a Leupold VX1 3-9.
Oh yeah.
Still got it. It's
was it a 3940, 3950?
Can't actually remember.
I reckon yours is a 50 because my first one was a 39 by 40.
Yeah, I reckon it might be. So, you know, that scope's sort of getting close to 15 years old now, and it's never missed a beat. So it's really cool to have products that have such good durability. And you know that if something goes wrong, you've still got a warranty.
Yeah,
And
that's incredible.
Probably a key point from a competition side of things too. Let's say you did theoretically have a problem with it. We're going back through that scope in quite fine detail. So every single part is going to get a check over. If we've got any concern over it, we'll put a brand new one in there to make sure it's good. Let's talk springs, bearing, cam followers, etc. So the scope you're getting back after a warranty result has been 100% checked by an optics technician before it go back to you.
It's essentially hand built.
So let's say we're talking another brand and you're just getting a brand new scope. What's to say that new scope's not going to have the same issue as your last one, for example? So there's a lot more in that than just a replacement option, for example. It's a lot more confidence from a shooter's perspective that you are getting the perfect scope back.
100%. Yep. And we, Leupold really support, I guess, their shooting communities that they look after really well.
Yeah.
So although the turnaround time, you know, for Leupold is very quick, as you mentioned, the turnaround time for other products can be lengthy. So Shawn and I have been supplied some loaner scopes from Leupold. So we basically have them available to people if something goes wrong. So I think twice this year, once at the Monado Meltdown and once at the Leupold sponsored match, the Capital Clash.
Yep.
Those scopes have been loaned out. So basically, if one of our fellow competitors or friends or anyone has a scope issue, their scope stops tracking or, you know, losing zero or whatever, you know, no matter what the brand, we've got them on hand ready to go. So we can essentially save someone's match and help them out, which is, thanks to Leupold that we can throw a scope at them and, you know, they can continue shooting their match.
Yeah, Leupold very passionate about their
Hugely,
scopes and
passionate.
PRS, you know, especially over in the States. But it's great to see the sport here in Australia as well. Well, guys, look, we're going to have to start wrapping this up, but I thought what we might do is, from your own perspective, we'll work through the line. Where do you see the future of PRS and where it's heading here in Australia?
I think you'll find as we said, the rimfire is a lot easier to get into. It's a lot more cost effective. So I think the rimfire is going to really take off in Australia. You'll find.
I think maybe too because of the ranges.
Yes, that's right. There's a lot more clubs that have ability.
Yep.
You don't need the distance. It's a lot easier probably to get some approvals and stuff like that. So I think the rimfire is going to really take off and go crazy. I think the Centerfire will just steadily keep growing. So, it's something that to get a Centerfire up and running and stuff, it just takes a bit more time and a bit more commitment. There's a lot of commitment to shoot Centerfire.
And Shawn, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I agree. Rimfire is definitely going to take off. I think Centerfire is going to continue to grow as more and more sort of grassroots clubs get on board with it. And we're seeing that, every year there's 2 or 3 new clubs popping up. So it's becoming more accessible for people to be able to shoot that, at their home range without too much travel. So
it really, originally when PRS started in Australia, there was a lot of South Australians and Victorians. There's been a strong club in South Australia, Precision Shooting SA, and then the Eagle Park Club in Victoria. But over the last couple of years, we've seen PRACT, which is Precision Rifle ACT in Canberra. We've seen at the Hilltop Range, we've got PRS New South Wales. Now we've got this new club up here at Jandowie in Queensland. There's a club down at Tassie starting to get a few good shooters come and travel to matches. And then we've also got a bunch of guys sort of coming from WA. They have a few more challenges over there with laws and stuff, but there's actually a fair crew of WA now. So it really is a competition where we've got a good cluster of people from every state. And there's, some strong clubs really starting to build some great shooters. And one thing that we've seen with the sport is good clubs build good shooters. Yeah. So the clubs that have 2 or 3 good shooters end up having 10 or 15 good shooters because they all, I guess, drive each other and go from there.
Yeah. I mean, this is exciting times because, it's great to see the sport develop. It's also great to see younger people getting involved in the sport because that is the future of our sport, not just here, but our industry as well in Australia. If you'd like to know more information, visit precisionrifleseries.com.au. Yep. They've got information there that you can certainly check out. Is that correct?
Yeah, on the website, there's a little bit of information about what the sport is. Obviously, you can look up series standings and scores. You can see all the sponsors like Leupold. They sponsor the series. Yeah, and obviously you can contact them from there. They also have a Facebook and Instagram page. So, yeah, if you want to learn anything about PRS, then, reach out to those pages or jump on. Shawn and I are both active on Facebook and Instagram and Lockie. So if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to us, whether it be regarding Leupold, other gear that we run, the sport, clubs, anything, more than happy to help.
Yep.
So there you go. Precision rifle shooting. It's something worth getting into, something definitely worth trying. As we talked about earlier, if you've been thinking about it, just give it a crack. Yep. Like I said, reach out to the guys, get out and shoot a match. But until then, Guy Jackson, Shawn Lawson, thanks for being on the NIOA Unloaded Podcast.